Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at my Pilot Vanishing Point with the gunmetal finish and matte black trim. I had never really seriously considered getting a vanishing point for two main reasons. I thought because I like to shift my grip around a lot as I'm riding, I thought the clip would get in the way of that. But you can see on this full-size vanishing point that with my normal grip, there's still plenty of room on either side for me to move my grip around. And I've even noticed that sometimes as I'm riding, I'll notice that I'm holding my pen with my index finger on the clip, and it's not uncomfortable at all. It's surprising how natural it feels to hold it this way. Another reason it took me so long to consider the vanishing point was I didn't think it would feel enough like a fountain pen. I thought it would just feel like using a ballpoint pen, but to my surprise, that couldn't be farther from the truth. It has a very satisfying nib that gives me that feeling of writing with a fountain pen. It's very enjoyable, very satisfying. I did have to hold it in my hands at a pen shop before I would consider getting one. And I visited the Applebaum store in Boston, and I went there to try out a Lamy 2000. And the minute I got it in my hand, I knew it wasn't going to work for me. Just the shape of the section and the material, the way it felt, I knew that wasn't a pen for me. And I didn't think the vanishing point would work either. I didn't have very high expectations. But the minute I got it in my hand, I was very pleased with the balance. This glossy finish is nice and grippy. It's very smooth, but very grippy. I've always kind of liked the look of the vanishing points with the matte black finish. I like the look of them. And so I like the look of this pen. And the balance, let me see, the center of the mass is just right under this ring. So I have pretty small hands. So the weight just hits right here. And so it just really nestles into my hand. And I feel like people with any size hand would find this pen very comfortable. And the nib is what really made me say, wow. I got one with an 18 karat extra fine nib, and it's got this dark coating. I don't know if it would be considered ruthenium plated or ion plated, but it's got a dark plating on it to match the dark trim. I'm going to do a writing sample with it and with a couple other extra fine nibs from my collection. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the reverse writing real quick. All right. You can see it's pretty dry, but still the ink flow is consistent, so you could write with it if you needed to, but this is very fine. It's smooth in all direction except for right to left. Normally, I would go ahead and maybe smooth it a little bit just in that direction with some micro mesh, just in case I wanted to do some reverse writing. But with this being a plated nib, especially having that dark plating, I don't want to rub that off and then have like a bright gold showing through. I want to preserve the look of the dark nib. So, I mean, this fine point is pretty fine to begin with. I don't anticipate needing anything more fine than this. Another thing I want to point out, and it may not be noticeable to anybody else except for me as I'm writing, the downstrokes are a little bit finer than the side strokes, so you get just a hint of architect character to your writing. Just something that makes writing with this pen a little bit different from my other fine nib pens. It's a very smooth and very satisfying nib to write with. I'm also going to do a writing sample with my Pilot Kaküno. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. I've dipped it in some Iroshizuku Asagao. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of difference in the wetness. The vanishing point maybe feels like it's writing a bit wetter just because it's a smoother nib. Now, this Kaküno is a smooth nib, but there's just a little bit more feedback. The nib on the paper just feels different. And maybe you can see from the scribble, those side strokes are maybe a little bit, yeah, I guess they're a little bit wider. The downstrokes are probably comparable on both, but the side strokes maybe are a little bit wider on the vanishing point nib. Let me check the reverse writing. The reverse writing is quite a bit broader. In fact, there's not a whole lot of difference in the line width between the regular writing and the reverse writing. This was pretty smooth. The ink flow is consistent. I should say it was pretty smooth in every direction except for right to left. If I were going to be doing any amount of reverse writing with this nib, I would go ahead and smooth it. But these two are so similar, I don't really feel like I need to be able to reverse write with this nib. So I just want to point out on this stainless steel nib, the lines in each direction are very uniform. They're pretty much the same in each direction. And I'm going to do one more writing sample with my Lamy Logo. It has a 14 karat extra fine nib that has also been dipped in Asagao. Okay, well, let me do the reverse writing real quick. The reverse writing is feedbacky, but it feels the same in each direction, so it doesn't feel scratchy, it just feels feedbacky. But it is very fine. The ink flow is uniform, but it's just, I feel like it's too fine to be of any practical use. But the most obvious thing is how much wider this Lamy extra fine is than the two Pilot extra fines. Now, A similarity between the Vanishing Point and the Lamy is that the downstrokes on the Lamy are ever so slightly thinner than the side strokes. The side strokes are a little bit wider, and again, it just gives you the tiniest bit of character to your writing, just makes it interesting to use this pen. Now, this isn't the nib that came on this pen. This came on a Lamy Studio. The logo came with a stainless steel nib, and I just took it off and swapped nibs with the Studio and gave the Studio away. And I've always been very fond of this pen. But the extra fine is not very extra fine, but it is a very smooth nib. I'll go ahead and give a close-up view of that line variation. So see on the Vanishing Point, the downstrokes are a little bit thinner than the side strokes. Not super noticeable in the writing, but as you are writing, you just feel that there's something different. Just makes it a little more enjoyable. I've always noticed that the Pilot steel nibs write very uniform in each direction. Now, if you compare that to the 14 karat nibs that you find on the Custom 74 and that style of gold nib, all the strokes will be uniform except for the upstroke. It'll be significantly drier than all the others. And so on that nib, you get a little line variation in your writing. It gives your writing some character. The character of the steel nibs is that it's just very crisp and uniform in each direction. And the Lamy gold nib one more time. You can see just very slight difference between the downstrokes and the side strokes. Now, when I was in the pen shop, the young man behind the counter dipped the nib in some ink for me, and when I wrote with it for the first time, it was one of those experiences where I just said, wow. Seeing that fine of a line and feeling how smooth the nib is, it just doesn't seem like it's possible. And then when I noticed, as I was doing some journaling later, that there's some slight line variation, it just makes using this pen a more special experience. One of the things I want to mention about my experience with this pen, I went into a pen shop not planning on buying a pen. Don't do that. Always do your research ahead of time. You know, we're fountain pen people. You know you're not going to go in a pen shop and not buy a pen. So I should have done a little more research ahead of time because I paid full retail price for this pen. Normally when you buy a pen like this, a Pilot pen from a retailer like Goulet or Goldspot or Van Ness or Anderson's, they'll have the retail price, but then it'll be marked out and it'll have the price that they're charging. And I paid full retail price. After I got back to the hotel room and made the mistake of looking up what the price was for it online, my heart just sank. But the more I thought about it, I would never even have gotten this pen if I hadn't tested it out in a store. So there was some value to being able to go into a pen store, try various pens, and come out with a pen that I love. So, and another thing, if I would have bought this online, I would have gotten the full matte black. And I'm sure I would have loved it, but I'm just really enjoying this glossy finish. I like the grippiness of it. Another thing, if I had bought a Vanishing Point online, I probably would have gotten a Decimo because I'm very fond of small pens. I've got small hands, and I probably would have been happy with the Decimo, but like I mentioned earlier, the fact that this section is larger probably makes it more comfortable and makes it easier for me to shift my grip around as I'm writing. And another thing, with this having a larger section that I'm accustomed to using, I tend to be someone who grips a pen pretty tightly, and the smaller the section, the more it digs into my finger here. And with this larger section, even if I grip it tight, just the shape of it, having a wider radius, makes it not dig into my hand. But I've also noticed that I don't grip it very tightly because the nib is so well tuned. I can write with such a light touch that I don't have to grip the pen. I hold it more gently since I can write with a lighter touch. So overall, it's been a very good experience. Now, if you want to buy a Pilot pen directly from a seller in Japan through something like eBay or even Amazon. I've bought pens on Amazon before that came directly from Japan, and you can get them significantly cheaper. I got online and looked. If I had purchased a Vanishing Point from Japan, I would have paid almost half of what I ended up paying for it. But you have to be careful when you're buying directly from Japan because they also sell Vanishing Points with steel nibs. And I've compared prices for the steel nib Vanishing Points to the 14 karat Vanishing Points, and they are very close in price. You have to really pay attention and make sure if you're wanting a gold nib pen, make sure you're buying a gold nib pen. And I had a little bit of a scare. That's probably exaggerating calling it a scare, but after I bought my Vanishing Point, you can't see any of the nib information. There's just barely any of the nib that shows. And so I was looking at my box, and it tells the color and the model and everything, but it doesn't say anything about, it says that it's an extra fine nib, but it doesn't say anything about the nib material. And that got me a little bit concerned, and I looked at the little tab that came on the clip, and again it says extra fine, and notice it says it's a capless, just the Japanese name for the pen. Again, didn't specify the nib material. So I did go ahead and take the pen apart and took out the nib section, and yes, it's an 18 karat nib, and I thought so because the nib just feels so soft on the paper. One of the few downsides, maybe this is the only downside to this pen, is on my E95S, if you use a converter, you can't see how much ink you have left in the pen, and I think it's going to be the same thing with this. So with my E95S, often I'll use a cartridge and just refill it, and then I can see how much ink I have in the pen. Well, with a Vanishing Point, if you use a cartridge, you have to put this little cover on it because the click mechanism, they don't want it to damage the cartridge and then it start leaking or something. Well, now under no circumstances can I see how much ink I have left in the pen. Fortunately, if I'm using cartridges, I can just always have a spare cartridge with me. But then if you're using an unusual ink color or if you're refilling a cartridge, I don't know, it makes it a little bit more of a hassle. But well worth it. If that's the only thing I have to complain about this pen, then no problem. One other concern that I have, and I don't know if this is going to be an issue, is I've seen people who have like the matte black Vanishing Point or pens with the matte black trim, and the matte black paint has chipped. And maybe because this is such a practical kind of everyday carry kind of pen, maybe those people just have their pen thrown in a drawer or thrown in a bag with other pens and pencils. So I always keep mine in a rickshaw sleeve, either this double sleeve. I've got my Custom Heritage 92 in there with it right now. So I kind of baby this pen. I might still be experiencing new pen bias, but I feel like right now, if someone told me you're only allowed to use one pen for the rest of your life, I think this would be it. I didn't really know until I had this pen how much I would appreciate just the convenience of it. And like I said, I was kind of worried that it would just feel like using a ballpoint pen. But when I'm using this pen, I feel like I'm using a fountain pen. It's that same enjoyable fountain pen experience. The nib on the paper just feels like a beautiful, well-tuned, enjoyable gold fountain pen nib. And so right now, this pen is like the one. I feel like this is going to be a pen that I always have inked up, and then I'll have another pen inked up to use with it. And this pen, I feel like, completes my fountain pen collection. This fills that void of like a practical, convenient pen. I don't really know of any other type of pen that has a feature that I'm missing from my collection that I feel like I want. I don't have any vacuum filler pens, but I've never really had the desire for a really high capacity pen. I like, using different inks each time I ink it up. So now I know what all the hoopla is about with the Pilot Vanishing Point. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.